He stepped onto the stage in downtown Chicago, guitar in hand, spotlight on his face, and in less than an hour, he would vanish without a trace. No body, no witnesses, no answers. Eric Lane was a rising musician, a voice that could silence a crowd. But on the night of his biggest show, something went terribly wrong. Cameras caught his final moments performing under neon lights. But what happened after that performance still haunts investigators to this day. Was it fame, fear, or something far darker that pulled him off that stage and into oblivion? 7 years later, an eerie recording surfaced online. Eric's voice, warped and ghostly, whispering a message no one can explain. This is the story of Eric Lane, the musician who vanished from the stage forever, and the mystery that refuses to fade into silence. Chicago, 2014, a city that never sleeps, a place where neon lights hum over cracked sidewalks and music spills from every bar door. On the South Side, in a neighborhood known for its gritty charm and endless rhythm, lived 29-year-old Eric Lane, a local musician whose voice could quiet an entire room. He wasn't famous yet, not in the way people dream of, but among the night crowd, he was already something of a legend, the guy with a guitar that sounded like heartbreak and a soul that never rested. Eric grew up just a few miles from where he now performed, raised by his mother, Carol, a retired nurse who said her son had been born singing before he could talk. His father left when he was 6, and from then on, music became the only steady presence in his life. By his early 20s, Eric had carved out a small but loyal following, performing at cramped venues where the air smelled of beer and nostalgia. His songs spoke of loneliness, second chances, and the ghosts that follow people home at night. To the people who knew him best, Eric was gentle but restless, the kind of man who could light up a room and then disappear into silence for days. His girlfriend, Mia Torres, a photographer and filmmaker, often recorded his shows, saying his performances felt like watching someone bleed honesty. She believed in him more than anyone else did, pushing him to release his first album, a project that was slowly taking shape when everything began to change. By the summer of 2014, Eric was finally on the edge of something big. Local radio stations had started playing his single, and a small record label out of New York expressed interest in signing him. His bandmates said he was anxious but excited, talking constantly about their upcoming live show at the Hollow Room, a dim, industrial-style music venue downtown known for its unpredictable energy and loyal underground crowd. It was the kind of place where stars were born and careers ended just as fast. But in the weeks leading up to that show, Eric's friends noticed subtle changes. He seemed distracted, often staring at nothing for long stretches of time. His notebook, once filled with lyrics and melodies, now had entire pages scribbled out and torn apart. He missed rehearsals, ignored calls, and sometimes disappeared without telling anyone where he went. Mia thought he was simply stressed, overwhelmed by the pressure, the possibility of success, the fear of becoming someone people actually recognized. But deep down, she felt something heavier brewing, something unspoken that even Eric couldn't name. Chicago was alive that summer. Festivals, concerts, endless crowds. But beneath the surface of all that movement was a man quietly unraveling. Eric's friends described a growing paranoia, a sense that someone was watching him. One night, after a gig in Wicker Park, he told his drummer he'd seen the same dark-colored car following him home more than once. He laughed it off the next day, said it was probably nothing, yet his tone carried unease. Still, the show went on. July 19th was set to be Eric's biggest performance yet, a chance to prove himself to both the industry and his city. Posters plastered across lamp posts bore his face, a hopeful smile beneath the words "Eric Lane Live, one night only." For weeks, he had talked about that night as the start of everything. What no one knew was that it would be the end. In the days leading up to his final show, something in Eric Lane began to fracture, The energy that once fueled him now felt strained, like a current shorting out inside his own mind. His friends tried to brush it off as nerves, but the signs were too sharp to ignore. He would show up late to rehearsals, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling slightly as he tuned his guitar. When asked if he was okay, he'd simply smile and say, "Just tired. Man, it's been a long week," though everyone knew exhaustion wasn't what they were seeing. It was fear, quiet, unspoken, but unmistakable. 3 nights before the concert, Mia found him sitting in their apartment's darkened living room, staring at the muted television. The glow from the screen flickered across his face, revealing an expression she hadn't seen before. Distant, hollow, like he was listening for something that wasn't there. He told her he kept hearing music, faint and off-key, even when everything was silent. He laughed about it, called it musician's brain, but Mia could tell the laughter was forced. He hadn't been sleeping, and when she pressed him, he admitted that someone had been texting him from an unknown number, messages that said things like, "You don't belong on that stage, and you already know how this ends." He claimed it was a prank, but refused to show her the messages, saying he'd deleted them. The night before the show, Eric showed up at the Hollow Room for a sound check that lasted less than 20 minutes. He complained that the sound system didn't feel right, that there was a hum under the speakers only he could hear. The crew checked everything and found nothing wrong. Later, one of the stage techs would tell investigators that Eric had looked paranoid, like someone waiting to be ambushed. When he left that night, he stood by the door for a long time, staring out into the rain-slicked street before finally walking off toward the subway. On the morning of July 19th, he posted a photo on his social media, a close-up of his guitar resting on a chair by the window. The caption read, "Every note has a story. Tonight, I tell mine." It was liked hundreds of times by fans and friends who had no idea they were reacting to a farewell. That night, the venue was packed beyond capacity. People lined up outside the brick building, the neon sign buzzing overhead like an omen. Inside, the air was heavy with heat and anticipation. Eric arrived an hour late, looking pale but composed, dressed in his usual worn denim jacket and black boots. He hugged his bandmates without a word, nodded to Mia, and walked straight to the stage entrance. When the lights dimmed and the crowd erupted, Eric seemed to come alive again. For the first few songs, he played flawlessly, his voice raw and magnetic. The audience swayed, shouted his lyrics back at him, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal. But halfway through the set, something changed. Witnesses later said he kept glancing toward the left side of the stage, where a narrow hallway led to the backstage area. Some thought he was watching a stagehand or waiting for a cue, but those close to the front said his expression shifted, confusion, then fear, then something that looked almost like recognition. As the final song began, Broken Night Sky, a haunting track he'd written months earlier, Eric's voice wavered. He played slower, as if the lyrics suddenly carried a weight too heavy to finish. When the last note faded, the crowd cheered, expecting an encore, but Eric simply set his guitar down, whispered something into the microphone, words no one could make out, and walked calmly off stage. The stagehands assumed he was taking a break before returning for the final song. But minutes passed, then 10, then 15, and Eric never came back. Backstage, his dressing room light was still on. His jacket hung neatly on the chair, his wallet and phone on the counter. His drink sat untouched beside a half-written set list. No one saw him leave. No alarms triggered. No exits opened without notice. The security cameras in the hallway froze for exactly 13 seconds around the time he vanished, showing only static. When the footage resumed, Eric was gone. The band waited, the audience chanted his name, and by midnight, panic began to ripple through the Hollow Room. By the time police arrived, the crowd had dispersed into the humid Chicago night, murmuring in disbelief. Some thought it was a stunt, a publicity trick for an upcoming album, but those who knew Eric knew better. His car was still parked behind the venue, keys inside, untouched. His mother called his phone every hour that night, leaving messages that went straight to voicemail. It would take only a few hours before his disappearance became the headline every local station would carry the next morning. Musician vanishes after live performance. Last seen on stage. And just like that, Eric Lane, the man whose songs once filled rooms with light, disappeared into the dark, leaving behind only silence and a question that would haunt Chicago for years to come. When officers first entered the hollow room that night, the scene felt wrong from the start, too clean, too still, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Eric's disappearance hadn't caused chaos, at least not in the physical sense. There were no overturned chairs, no signs of a struggle, no broken instruments or scuffed floors, nothing that pointed toward violence. Yet, the deeper investigators looked, the more unsettling it became. His guitar remained where he'd placed it at the end of his set, its strap folded neatly over the body. His denim jacket hung on a hook near the mirror, his phone and wallet side by side on the dressing table, untouched. Everything looked prepared, deliberate, almost staged. But for what? No one could tell. Detectives quickly reviewed the security footage from the night, combing through hours of grainy black and white video. Eric could be seen walking down the narrow hallway behind the stage at 10:47 p.m., heading toward the back exit, his silhouette calm, unhurried. Then, just as he neared the corner where the hallway turned left, the screen flickered into static. 13 seconds later, the feed returned, but Eric was gone. No figure emerging, no door opening, no sound picked up on the venue's microphones. Just emptiness. The glitch was confined to that single camera. Every other one in the building had continued recording without interruption. At first, police suspected a malfunction. But when the footage was tested by forensic techs, the data revealed something far stranger. The missing 13 seconds weren't just corrupted. They'd been erased, overwritten by blank video frames with no metadata trail. Someone had deliberately tampered with it. The question was who and why. Outside the building, detectives searched the surrounding blocks. The rain from earlier in the evening had washed away any potential footprints or tire marks, leaving slick pavement and glistening puddles. Eric's car remained parked by the alley, driver's door locked, keys still in the ignition as if he had every intention of returning. Inside the trunk were 2 guitar cases, a box of demo CDs, and a small notebook filled with set lists and scribbled lines that looked like unfinished lyrics. One page stood out, the words "They're waiting for me tonight," written in uneven ink, the line repeated twice as if he'd been interrupted mid-thought. By morning, the story had exploded. News outlets ran with it before police had even finished collecting evidence. Local musician vanishes during live show, no trace found. Social media lit up with speculation. Some fans claimed to have seen a man following Eric from the stage area before the lights went down. Others swore they'd heard a commotion backstage that was quickly drowned out by music from the speakers. None of it was confirmed, but the rumors moved faster than the truth ever could. When detectives examined the emergency exits, they discovered something unsettling. One of the back doors, the one leading into a narrow service alley, showed faint scuff marks near the handle, as though someone had forced it slightly open and then closed it again. The door's camera, which should have captured the area, had been disconnected from its power source sometime between 10:40 and 10:55 p.m., the exact window when Eric disappeared. Whoever had done it knew the building's layout and timing perfectly. For the next 48 hours, police searched every nearby block, checking abandoned buildings, rooftops, subway stations, and dumpsters. 9 units tracked no scent beyond the venue's alley. It was as if Eric had walked into a blind spot and never come out. Detectives questioned everyone who had access to the backstage area, the sound techs, security staff, bartenders, bandmates, but no one had seen him leave. Then came the most chilling discovery. 2 days after the disappearance, The venue's owner turned over footage from a hidden security camera he'd installed himself, one not listed in the building's official system. It faced the loading dock behind the stage, where delivery trucks came and went. At exactly 10:51 p.m., the same time the hallway feed went dark, the camera captured a figure exiting the door, tall, wearing a black hoodie, the hood pulled low. The person carried something in their right hand, something long and heavy, covered with a dark cloth. They walked quickly toward the alley, disappearing into the rain. The footage was grainy, the lighting poor, but what sent chills through investigators was the timing. 13 seconds later, the door opened again, this time empty, swinging slightly in the wind before closing on its own. The figure never returned. The timestamp matched the exact duration of the missing footage inside. From that point forward, the case shifted from a missing person to a suspected abduction. Detectives mapped out every detail, every second, every possible route someone could take from that backstage hallway to the outside alley without being seen. But none of it made sense. There were no eyewitnesses, no fingerprints, no DNA, no vehicle descriptions, nothing. Whoever had taken Eric, if anyone had, moved with precision, speed, and knowledge of the space that suggested this wasn't random. Meanwhile, as the days passed, Chicago's underground music scene turned mournful. Posters of Eric's face were taped to walls and lampposts. Candles lined the sidewalk outside the hollow room, and musicians performed tribute shows, hoping to raise money for search efforts. Yet even as the city grieved, a darker theory began to surface, one that would soon take the investigation down a very different path. In the first week following Eric Lane's disappearance, Chicago police launched one of the most extensive urban searches in recent memory, combing through alleys, tunnels, and abandoned warehouses stretching 5 miles from the hollow room. Helicopters hovered over the city's South Loop, dive teams searched the nearby river, and volunteers distributed flyers across every coffee shop and subway platform. Yet, despite the citywide effort, not a single trace of Eric surfaced. It was as if he had dissolved into the air that night, leaving behind only fragments of a life paused mid-performance. Detectives began reconstructing his final 72 hours, interviewing everyone who had crossed paths with him. His bandmates described a man on edge, saying Eric had been quiet during rehearsals and unusually distracted. One of them, bassist Mark Cavanaugh, mentioned that Eric had taken several mysterious phone calls in the week before the show, always stepping outside to talk and returning visibly shaken. When detectives subpoenaed his phone records, they discovered something odd: multiple outgoing calls to an unregistered number that traced back to a prepaid phone purchased from a gas station 2 months earlier. The calls stopped abruptly the day before he vanished. The lead investigator, Detective Raymond Shaw, a veteran with 25 years on the force, described the case as one of those that feels alive, like it's still moving somewhere out there. His team pursued every possible angle: a kidnapping, a stalker fan, a secret debt, even a voluntary disappearance. But every route seemed to collapse halfway, revealing only fragments that refused to fit together. Eric's apartment offered few clues. Nothing packed, no signs of sudden departure. His laptop was found on his desk, still open to a folder labeled Set Ideas, containing rough mixes, scanned lyrics, and one encrypted document named Session_13. When forensic analysts decrypted the file, it revealed a chilling sequence of journal-like entries, written in the week leading up to his disappearance. They weren't song lyrics. Not exactly. They read more like fragmented thoughts, restless confessions. In one entry dated July 14th, Eric wrote, "I keep hearing the same melody everywhere I go. It's not mine. It follows me, even when the instruments stop." Another line simply read, "He said I'd never finish the set." The pronoun hung in the air like smoke, he said. No one could determine who he was. Detectives brought in Mia for questioning again. She told them Eric had become increasingly withdrawn, often pacing their apartment at night, staring out the window toward the street below. She admitted he'd spoken of a man watching him, though she dismissed it at the time as paranoia fueled by exhaustion. She also revealed something new. 2 nights before the show, she'd found an unfamiliar flash drive plugged into her computer, one she didn't recognize. It contained a single audio file titled Final Mix. When investigators played it, they heard what sounded like the opening chords to one of Eric's songs, followed by a faint humming, a second voice layered beneath the music, whispering a sentence no one could fully decipher. The file's metadata was wiped clean. Detective Shaw sent the recording to an audio forensics lab, which confirmed the second voice was male, but distorted beyond recognition. That detail alone shifted the investigation's tone. Someone had access to Eric's personal materials and was deliberately embedding messages into his work. It wasn't just a disappearance anymore. It was beginning to look like obsession. A week later, a tip came from a street vendor who claimed he'd seen a man resembling Eric in a nearby subway station the morning after the show, barefoot and wearing a dark hoodie. The footage from the station cameras, however, showed nothing. Another tip pointed police toward an abandoned sound studio on the west side, once used by local musicians. Inside, detectives found scattered equipment, dust-covered amplifiers, and walls covered in soundproofing foam. But on one of the mixing tables lay a single cassette tape marked with the initials YELL. When they played it, static filled the speakers for several seconds before Eric's unmistakable voice came through, faint, distant, almost whispering, "It's still following me." Then the tape cut off. The FBI joined the investigation soon after, analyzing whether the case connected to any prior missing musician reports, but nothing matched. No ransom notes, no demands, no activity on Eric's bank accounts or social media. His online presence froze exactly at 6:12 p.m. on the night of the show, when he posted his final photo. Every digital trace ended there, like a clock that stopped mid-tick. Then, nearly a month later, the investigation took its first major turn. A jogger near the Chicago River reported finding a guitar strap tangled in driftwood by the bank. When retrieved, it was confirmed to be Eric's, custom leather, engraved with his initials. But what disturbed investigators was its condition. The strap appeared burned on one side, the leather stiff and blackened, as though exposed to heat, yet there were no signs of fire anywhere near the riverbank. Tests revealed residue consistent with electrical damage, a high-voltage discharge, not flames. Nobody could explain it. Reporters swarmed every police briefing, demanding answers, but Shaw remained guarded. "We're dealing with something unusual," he told one journalist, "and it's not following the rules we're used to." Behind closed doors, detectives debated whether they were looking for a killer, a cult, or something else entirely. Then came the twist that deepened everything. 3 weeks after the strap was found, an anonymous envelope arrived at the station. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, black and white, showing what looked like a man sitting in a small, windowless room. His face was partially turned away, but the outline of his jaw, his hair, his posture, it was Eric. On the back, written in blue ink, were 5 words, "The show's not over yet." The photograph had no timestamp, no return address, no digital trail. Forensic tests couldn't even determine what kind of printer had been used. But one detail froze everyone who saw it. In the upper corner of the image, barely visible, was a reflection in what appeared to be a glass panel behind the figure. It wasn't Eric's reflection. It was someone else's. And from that moment on, investigators realized they weren't just chasing a missing musician. They were chasing the shadow of someone who already knew exactly how this story would end. As the weeks turned into months, the case of Eric Lane began to slip from the front pages, replaced by newer headlines, fresher tragedies. But for the detectives still working the file, it refused to fade. The deeper they dug, the less sense it made. Every discovery only opened another door, another possibility, Another dead end that felt deliberate. What had started as a straightforward missing person investigation was now tangled in a maze of contradictions. Part obsession, part art, part something no one could quite define. Detective Shaw became consumed by it. He began retracing Eric's past, mapping his old haunts, piecing together fragments of a life that seemed to blur at the edges. He visited every bar Eric ever played, spoke to every promoter who booked him, every bartender who'd poured his drinks, and what emerged was a portrait of a man haunted by something unseen long before the night he disappeared. People described him as gifted but unpredictable, deeply emotional yet detached. A man who could sing about pain so vividly that listeners often forgot it wasn't their own. And yet, beneath the music, there was always an unease, stories of sleepless nights, nervous glances over his shoulder, sudden breaks in performance where he'd freeze mid-song and stare into the crowd, as if recognizing a face no one else could see. When police revisited Eric's phone data, they found something chilling hidden in the metadata, fragments of deleted messages recovered from cloud storage. Most were one-line texts from the same unregistered number he'd contacted before the show. They read like commands. Play the song. Don't change the order. Finish what you started. The messages stopped the night he vanished, and despite every trace route and triangulation attempt, the source could never be found. It was as if whoever sent them existed outside the network itself. Investigators began to wonder whether Eric's disappearance was part of something larger, an orchestrated performance or punishment tied to the music industry's darker corners. A few of his acquaintances hinted that Eric had gotten involved with a private investor who promised him funding for his album, someone who operated off the books and dealt in favors rather than contracts. One of his bandmates described seeing Eric arguing with a tall man in a leather jacket behind the venue weeks before the show, his voice raised, hands shaking. The man was never identified, and no footage of him was ever recovered. But then came a revelation that fractured everything. When forensic analysts examined Eric's last audio recordings, they discovered hidden data embedded in the sound waves themselves, a process called steganography, often used by hackers to conceal messages within digital files. Once decoded, the pattern revealed coordinates. They pointed to a warehouse district on the city's outskirts, a place long abandoned after a fire a decade earlier. Shaw's team searched it thoroughly and found traces of recent activity, footprints in dust, cigarette butts, a makeshift sleeping area, and carved into one of the wooden beams near the center of the building, the initials YEL beneath a faint symbol resembling a circle crossed by two vertical lines. No one could explain what it meant. Mia, still clinging to hope, began working with online sleuths who theorized that Eric had staged his own disappearance, claiming the entire event was a performance piece about fame, anonymity, and obsession, an artistic act that blurred the line between life and creation. But that theory shattered when a financial audit revealed Eric had emptied none of his accounts, hadn't touched his royalties, and left behind thousands in unclaimed deposits. People don't vanish into thin air without preparation, and Eric had made none. Yet, there were moments that suggested something else entirely. Several of his unreleased demo tracks began circulating online months after his disappearance, uploaded by anonymous accounts to obscure music forums. The songs contained distorted versions of his old work, same lyrics, different tone, each track layered with eerie whispers and reversed harmonies that sounded like pleas for help when slowed down. Investigators couldn't trace the uploads, though one IP address briefly pinged from a neighborhood less than a mile from the Hollow Room. It was checked, but nothing was found. As 2015 approached, the case began to rot under the weight of unanswered questions. Some detectives believed Eric had been kidnapped by someone obsessed with his music, a fan who wanted to possess him, not harm him. Others leaned toward a more calculated theory, one involving extortion, secrets, and the kind of silence money could buy. But there was also the unsettling idea, whispered quietly among those who worked the case the longest, that maybe Eric wasn't taken at all. Maybe he followed someone willingly that night, someone he thought he knew. Detective Shaw's last note in the case file before it went cold summed up what everyone had come to feel but couldn't prove. This wasn't random. It was rehearsed. Years later, when the media revisited the story on the anniversary of Eric's disappearance, new listeners found themselves caught between fascination and unease. Theories flooded online spaces, everything from cult involvement to mental breakdown, even paranormal speculation tied to the glitching video and burned guitar strap. But through all the noise, one truth stood constant. Eric Lane had simply vanished, leaving behind echoes that refused to die. Those who knew him still listened to his last recorded show, the haunting performance of Broken Night Sky. And if you listen closely, at the very end, just before the applause fades, a faint sound lingers, something like a whisper beneath the crowd noise, a voice that no one can quite make out. Some say it's just feedback, others swear it says, "I'm still here." By the 7th year of Eric Lane's disappearance, most people had moved on. The file officially classified as inactive, the public reduced it to another cautionary tale in a long list of artists gone missing under strange circumstances. But for Detective Shaw, retirement brought no relief. He kept the case folder on his desk at home, pages yellowed, notes smudged, still reopening it every few months like a ritual he couldn't abandon. Something about it refused to let him go. The lack of closure, the faint sense that the story wasn't finished. Then, one night in late 2021, an anonymous email arrived in his inbox from an encrypted address. It contained only a link and a single line. He wanted you to hear this. Against his better judgment, Shaw clicked it. The link led to a private streaming page hosting an unreleased audio file titled E.L. Final Transmission. He played it once, then again and again. The first 30 seconds sounded like a normal song. Acoustic guitar, slow tempo, Eric's unmistakable voice singing in a lower register. But beneath the melody, barely audible, were layers of static and reversed sounds. When run through forensic filters, the waveform revealed something chilling. The same symbol found carved into the warehouse beam years earlier, now visualized in the audio spectrogram. The track ended abruptly with a deep, resonant hum followed by silence. Then, faintly, a single phrase, whispered and distorted. It was never about the music. The IP trace from the upload led to a relay chain bouncing across multiple countries, but one ping stood out. A brief signal originating from a small town in Montana, not far from where an abandoned radio tower stood on private land. Shaw alerted local authorities, and a search team was dispatched. The tower had long been out of service, overtaken by rust and vines. Yet when investigators entered the control room, they found evidence of recent occupation: a sleeping bag, food wrappers, a portable generator, and a half-burned notebook containing sketches of sound waves, coordinates, and cryptic phrases like "frequencies don't forget." But the most disturbing find was an old reel-to-reel tape machine, still powered on, its tape slowly spinning. When played, it emitted the same background hum heard in the digital file, except this time, layered within were distorted fragments of Eric's old lyrics, stretched and warped as though someone had been trying to reconstruct his voice from broken memories. The lab confirmed the audio fingerprint matched Eric's original recordings, but no one could explain how it had been modified or by whom. A month later, hikers discovered what remained of a man's belongings buried shallowly near a riverbed not far from the tower. A rusted guitar tuner, a ring with the initials "Yell," and fragments of cassette tape sealed inside a glass jar. DNA was inconclusive, degraded beyond use, but it reignited the case. Speculation surged online again, dividing the true crime community between those who believed Eric had died there and those who insisted he was alive, hiding in plain sight, manipulating his own myth through posthumous releases. Shaw, now in his late 60s, listened to Final Transmission countless times in the months that followed. He began noticing faint irregularities, patterns of silence arranged at precise intervals, like Morse code. When translated, they formed a fragmented message. I didn't disappear. I was erased. Whether it was coincidence, a hoax, or genuine communication, no one could say. The case was briefly reopened, but no new evidence emerged. Every digital trace eventually led to voids, wiped servers, dead links, ghost accounts. Yet every few months, without announcement, another anonymous upload would appear online. Distorted audio, short clips, always under different aliases, but each sharing the same symbol hidden in the waveform. Fans began calling it the Vanishing Project, an evolving digital ghost story that blurred fact and fiction so completely that even experts couldn't separate them anymore. In the end, no body was found, no confession surfaced, no definitive truth revealed. Eric Lane remained both gone and present, a haunting echo woven through the very medium he loved most. His last known words, captured on that warped recording, became his epitaph in the minds of those who still listened. Every note remembers. Detective Shaw passed away 2 years later, his case notes found stacked neatly beside his old record player. The final page contained a single line in his handwriting. Some disappearances aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be heard. And somewhere, in the endless archive of the internet, Eric's voice still plays, drifting through forgotten channels and static frequencies, calling out to anyone who dares to listen closely enough to the silence between the sounds. Some stories never truly end. They just sink beneath the surface, echoing in the quiet moments when we least expect them. Eric Lane's disappearance is one of those stories. A song without closure, still playing somewhere beyond our reach. His name became a whisper in Chicago's underground music scene, a legend born not from fame, but from absence. And we're left to wonder, how well do we really know the people we watch rise? How much pain hides behind the applause, the spotlight, the illusion of success? Eric's story asks us to look beyond the headlines, beyond the mystery itself, and into the fragile humanity of those who create. Because sometimes, the real disappearance happens long before the person is gone. Maybe that's the haunting truth. Some vanish from the world, others vanish within it. And somewhere, in the faint hum of an untuned guitar or the static between radio frequencies, Eric Lane's voice might still be reaching out, not for fame, not for help, but for remembrance. If this story left you thinking, if it made you pause, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Last Clue for more haunting, investigative true crime stories. Because every case, every clue, and every voice deserves to be heard, even the ones that never come back.